This is Rod Evans, and this is mini lecture 4 discussing art and literature strategies. Although you will sometimes need to know some artistic or literary terms, you will especially profit from knowing famous artists and authors and the names of their works. You'll want to know, for example, that James Joyce, the Irish author, published the novel Ulysses in a stream of consciousness style. Literary figures and their works. You'll want to recognize major works by a novelist or a poet, the writing contemporaries of a prominent author. For example, Thoreau and Emerson were contemporaries. The literary movement or period with which a writer is primarily associated. Literary terminology. You will sometimes be tested on your knowing the names of literary movements or styles. For example, James Joyce and Virginia Woolf were contemporaries and associated with stream of consciousness writing, whereas the poet Ezra Pound was associated with the modernist movement, prominent in the late teens and the early 1920s in Europe. Consider this analogy. Orwell is to 1984 as A. Hawthorne, B. Melville, C. Cooper, D. Conrad is to Moby Dick. The answer is, just as George Orwell wrote the novel 1984, so Herman Melville wrote Moby Dick. Faulkner is to The Sound and the Fury as Hammett is to A. The Thin Man, B. A Study in Scarlet, C. The Spy Who Came In from the Cold, D. Ice Station Zebra. Just as William Faulkner wrote The Sound and the Fury, so Dashiell Hammett, writer of noir detective fiction, wrote The Thin Man. Visual artists and their works. On the website, we give you the names of many prominent painters, sculptors, and architects, and their most famous works. Art terminology. You will sometimes be asked to recognize the major artists in some movement and sometimes the time the movement occurred. For example, abstract expressionism is to pointillism as A. O'Keeffe, B. Pollock, C. Klimt, D. Picasso is to SEURAT. SEURAT was a pioneer in pointillist art, just as Pollock was a pioneer in abstract expressionism. Rodin is to Michelangelo as the thinker is to A. Mona Lisa, B. Guernica, C. The Kiss, D. David. Rodin created the famous sculpture called The Thinker, whereas Michelangelo created the famous sculpture called David. Musicians, composers, and their works. You'll do well to know the names of classical composers from the 17th through the 19th century and the names of their works. The MAT sometimes includes popular music artists and composers including George Gershwin and jazz artist Charlie Parker and Thelonious Monk. Musical terms. The makers of the MAT like musical terms, such as adagio, largo, and presto. We have included such terms and their meanings on the website for this course. Largo is to adagio as A. Andante, B. Presto, C. Fortissimo, D. Crescendo is to allegro. Largo means to play very slowly, whereas adagio means to play slowly. Presto means to play very fast, whereas allegro means to play fast. Rossini is to the Barber of Seville as A. Handel, B. Brahms, C. Strauss, D. Vivaldi is to the Four Seasons. Just as Rossini wrote the Barber of Seville, so Vivaldi wrote the Four Seasons.